Welcome, everybody, to the premiere episode of Geek Salad's Retro Records. From the Geek Salad podcast, I'm Andy.
I'm Joe.
I'm Todd.
I'm still getting used to this. I'm not used to being on this side because Mike is usually the one to produce these. So I'm always where Todd is. So, yeah. Oh, we decided that we are going to do something completely new and different with the Geek Salad YouTube channel. This is a great resource for us. So what we're going to be doing is myself, Todd, and I get Joe. Have you officially joined the fold yet?
I have. I did.
You bought a turntable?
Well, Jim's let me borrow let me borrow his for the moment, but
that counts.
I will be purchasing one in the near future.
Yes.
Amazing. Gotcha. Amazing. So, as everybody who listens to our podcast knows, Todd is, as you can tell from behind him, a huge vinyl fan. You can follow him on Instagram, and he would, when he was working from home, yes, he was putting up copies of the records he was listening to when he was working from home, and he is a huge vinyl fan. And him and our friend Jim, who could not make it tonight, got me into vinyl. And over the holidays, I got a few discs, and now it's that sickness that you get now that you want more.
Yes.
So we were just comparing before Joe came on. We were comparing our original pressings and all that stuff. And I have a lot of my mother's old discs. So while they aren't worth anything because the condition of the sleeves, I have an original pressing of Meet the Beatles and an original pressing of Rubber Soul. I have the Chicago albums, but back when they were still good.
Oh, I did find my my Chicago album. Which one? 1986 would have been Chicago
17, I think. No,
17.
Joe, I'm talking about a collection of Chicago when it was Cetera and the Horns.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing with this new show. We're going to be bringing our passion for music, which is it's always been one of my favorite topics to discuss on our podcast. So we're going to bring that in a little bit more of a cellular level in terms of just discussing albums. If we have it on vinyl, which Todd is going to reveal that, of course, our debut record, which tonight is 1970s All Things Must Pass by one Mr. George Harrison.
The best Beatle, by the way.
The best Beatle. I actually did a poll on our Twitter, which is at Geek Salad Radio, and I asked who had the best solo output. It was a tie, actually, between George and Paul, with Ringo and John also being tied. In that,
I think Paul gets a lot of leeway for his work with
Wings.
Well,
he's also the
just because he had to keep Linda employed,
He also survived. I'm not saying that to be
longevity through survival.
I don't want to sound dark or anything like that, but realistically, he's the only one who's been alive enough to have output. Ringo does his own
songwriting talent. I mean, Ringo's still with us, but he does not have that songwriting gene in his body. Because all of Ringo's solo output that is a hit or memorable was written by the other Beatles. Or it's Carl Perkins or something like that. He didn't have that songwriting bone. Not to say it's bad output. It's very good because he can rock. You know what I mean? But it's not at the level of the other three, especially George.
Well, Ringo really kind of gets the short end of the stick when it comes to the Beatles, and unnecessarily so. I mean, the guy, he is a talented drummer. He's a very good drummer. Some of the stuff he does is very difficult for a lot of drummers to play.
Yeah,
and he's a good. I mean, I've seen some of his live concerts on video and stuff like that. He's a professional. He's a good musician. So I think a lot of the hate that's showered on Ringo is really undeserved.
And all you need to know is that in 2004 or 2005, Dave Grohl, who I think is the best drummer of this generation, had an interview, which we can debate. He had an interview in Rolling Stone, and they asked who his favorite drummer is, who his most influential drummer is, and it's Ringo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
oh, yeah.
There you go. It's not. I mean, Neil Peart and Keith Moon and all Mitch Mitchell and all these drummers are wonderful, but you wouldn't have rock drumming now without what Ringo did.
Right.
And speaking of Ringo, he's on this album a lot.
Yeah.
Well, but like I said, with that said, George is still the best Beatle. He is the best Beatle.
Well, we actually got some feedback on this poll too. Friend of the show, Dave McLean, mentioned that the way that you break down the Beatles solo work is John had the best single in Imagine.
Yes.
George recorded the best album, All Things Must Pass, which another friend of the show, Kurt Smith, agrees that George's solo work is the strongest, and he had the best solo album. Paul recorded the largest number of albums so far and the best output overall, meaning that he's just been...
Volume. He's got volume.
He's got volume. He's been doing the solo gig for 50 years now. And Ringo recorded the only solo album that all four Beatles actually played on.
Yeah.
So Ringo gets that.
Yep.
But the joke has always been with All Things Must Pass that it's every song that George wrote for the Beatles, and John and Paul just like no. And I'll be 100% honest with you. I went back. I've listened to this album like 5 times since we decided that this was going to be the album we wanted to discuss. There is not a bad song on this album.
No.
Even the jam sessions. And I usually kind of find that jam records can be a bit masturbatory. The jams are actually pretty solid.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. And kind of going back to your point about, this versus the other Beatles albums. If you're a hardcore Beatles fan, you know what the albums of each individual Beatle, like if you were a hardcore Beatles fan, you could probably rattle off, 10 to 15 of Paul McCartney's album. But for the casual Beatle fan, All Things Must Pass is like the first one that comes to mind. Just because one, it gets the most airplay out of all the solo Beatles albums.
It also was the first solo Beatles song to yield the number 1 hit.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just a more generally more recognized overall album than most of most of the other output.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you know what one of my favorite things to think about, well, my favorite, but also makes me feel terrible about my life, is this man in this photograph, when he wrote these songs, he was 26 years old.
I know, right?
And he had already made 13.
It's like, where did I go wrong?
He was 26 years old when the Beatles broke up. 26. What have I done with my life? Nothing.
Yeah, 26, I was recovering from a divorce.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Anyways.
Mind-blowing to me. And he had already done so much in his life, and he had already experienced so much. And he had all these musical, all these musical journeys, with him and Indian music and the sitar and Ravi Shankar and Wonderwall music and electronic music and all Moog synthesizers. He did it all. And then came out with this, which is unparalleled, in my opinion.
Well, and when you consider what he was going through at the time when he was putting this album together, just his life in general with everything that was going on.
Yeah.
To be able to put this, and I guess it's probably a result of everything that was going on, possibly, that just you can feel it all in that album.
Right.
He said, "Hey, Yoko, no. John, Paul, no, not going to do it. I'm going to hang with Bob Dylan and the band and Eric Clapton. Oh, and by the way, Eric Clapton's going to try to steal my wife.
Well, he's recording this album.
We're going to write Badge together, and we're going to write all these things together and just create amazing music together. Unbelievable."
What's amazing about this album also is that you really get a sense for the artist that George was going to become later on down the line for his more recognizable stuff in the 80s.
Yeah.
The stuff that he did with Jeff Lynne, the stuff that he did with the Wilburys, the stuff that even Cloud 9.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Cloud 9 might have one of his worst songs ever, which is also his biggest hit. But it's fun, don't get me wrong, but
there are great songs on that album.
Yeah, there are excellent songs on that album.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think that, you know, when after Cloud 9, he took a major hiatus. And then the last thing that came out was actually posthumous Brainwashed, which is actually right up there with some of my favorite of his work.
Yeah.
Finished by his son, Danny, and Jeff Lynne after he passed. So, you know, his bookend career as a solo artist is unmatched, unparalleled.
Yeah. It's crazy. It really is. Because, I mean, we go into this. I was kind of considering that maybe we talk about our favorite songs on this album, but because there's not really a bad song on this album, it's almost like just discuss the songs. But Joe was going to mention that his favorite song is What Is Life?
Oh, yeah.
If there's ever a song that opens the door and just gives you a preview of what George Harrison's output is going to be going forward, if I didn't know any better, you couldn't convince me that Jeff Lynne didn't produce that song.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the amazing thing about the song, and it's really kind of, it encapsulates it. The song itself encapsulates the entirety of the album itself in terms of the Phil Spector wall of sound. You know, that song has it, and then the way it starts off, you know, the recognizable riff.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the lyrics themselves are very simple. It's just repetitive, but the way it builds with each verse, and even within each verse, how he first it's just like a standard. You know, you're thinking, okay, it's probably just the standard 4-piece band. Then you add the orchestration. Then you started adding the horns, and then you top it off with George's own slide guitar playing.
Yeah,
it just adds that little right at the end. It's just like, and it. The hard thing about the wall of sound that Phil Spector kind of revolutionizes, it's very easy for each individual part of the song to get lost.
Yeah,
and if it's not produced right, it's very easy. It just becomes muddled. It just becomes a muddled noise.
Yeah,
but somehow they pulled it off in this, where each individual part of the song really contributes to the whole, but doesn't get lost. And you see that through this entire album. I mean, not just What Is Life, but Awaiting on You All does the same thing. The Art of Dying. I mean, it just the entire album is just like that.
It's amazing. Yeah. And why I think that is because Phil Spector was coked out of his mind. Phil
Spector was coked out of his mind. Eric Clapton was shooting up heroin, cocaine, and downing gallons of bourbon. You know, it's just they were all. I don't know how many tabs of acid George must have done during the whole time.
So I think with that, George probably took a bigger portion of the production. The wall of sound was there, and it was recorded in such a way where it had that big volume.
Right.
Overwhelming of noise. But George, I think, and his ear fine-tuned it, and that's what makes this different than anything Phil Spector did. Even Let It Be.
Oh God, yeah.
He just.
But that's the thing is, even though it's got the wall of sound, it doesn't lose any of its intimacy.
Mm-hmm. No.
Like the song that follows up What Is Life, If Not For You, it's still a very full song, but it's still very tender and very intimate.
Yeah.
Which is, again, you see this throughout the entire album. It's like, there's a lot going on, and you're picking up noises and everything else, but nothing gets lost.
Yeah, those tender moments are definitely there.
Yeah.
Behind that locked door, things like that.
Yep.
And when we were talking about these our favorite songs and what we wanted to discuss, the very last track on the album proper is Hear Me Lord, which you can see the gospel influence that Billy Preston brought to this, and it's a song that you can easily overlook, kind of like George's Long, Long, Long on the White Album.
Yeah.
Where you just like, oh, it's there and you don't really pay attention. Go back and listen to that song. It's unbelievable. And it hits me in a way that, you know, it hits me a different way each time, but it's always an emotional experience for me on that song.
Yeah.
And I would say that for the whole album.
Yeah. There's so much. I mean, the use of slide guitar is so it's there. You can tell it's there, but it's so covert. It's not a gimmick that is just played throughout the album.
No, it's an enhancement. Like I said, in What Is Life, when he starts playing that slide guitar in the third verse, it's just like, okay, yeah, it's perfect. You know, which is kind of a contrast to the way the song itself was building up right up to that point.
Right.
You know, because then, you know, second verse, it adds the horns and the orchestration and everything else. And you're like, oh, it's getting bigger and bigger. And then he just adds the slide guitar, just kind of brings everything back a little bit.
Yeah. I can't say enough good about this album, because quite honestly, if you stack it up with some of the Beatles' later output, I mean, I love the Beatles, don't get me wrong, but the later albums, post White Album, for a lot of instances, I would say the White Album as well, they just feel like a divorce.
Oh, yeah.
Let It Be just sounds like my parents are getting divorced. Which brings me to an interesting thing, the song Wah Wah. You know, if you want to talk about songs that,
Scathing.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
Scathing rebuke of Paul McCartney in particular, but the Beatles as a whole.
But do you get the feeling that was just a White Album reject, though? Because it totally sounds like it belongs on the White Album.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you see that with a bunch of, especially Paul. Paul had a lot of songs written for the White Album, Junk, Teddy Boy, that appeared on McCartney and Ram, you know, going forward, because the rest of the group was like, no, we don't want to do, what did John call something like Martha My Dear or Maxwell Silverhammer? He called it like Your Grandma's Bullshit or something.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. Yeah, that they all hated each other at that point.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, if you've seen the movie Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, with Justin Long playing George Harrison, it's just, I'm just trying to get some more songs on the album.
Yeah, and it's basically what it was. I mean,
sitting there while my guitar quietly whimpers.
I would say that, you know, we talked about how this was George's like just backlog of songs that he did from 1967 through 1970. By this time, you know, he also had written Here Comes the Sun, Something, which Frank Sinatra called one of the greatest love songs of all time. His songwriting was I think better than the rest of the Beatles at that point. Definitely John, who was, you know, not interested anymore in really creating something, and definitely Ringo. So I would say it's between George and Paul at that point on who the better songwriter was.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But the collaborations that George had and the influence that he had was so different than what the Beatles were doing at that time with Dylan and the band. Like, you're bringing it back to something really special in 1968 and 69 that the Beatles didn't have at that point. They were burnt out. Right.
I mean, George definitely picked his friends well.
Oh God, yeah.
Well, what's funny,
to a certain extent, you know.
Yeah. Hey, what's Patty up to? You know, she's my wife, right? Still thought I'd ask.
We'll still be friends forever.
Well, I mean, let's face it. He essentially had Derek and the Dominoes as his backing band. You know, I mean, because they were recording Layla approximately at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he basically, you know, Eric took the rejects of Delaney and you know, Bonnie Bramlett, you know, and formed Derek and the Dominoes, and George is like, hey, you want to record with me? And he's like, okay. I mean, I get to be with Patty? Okay.
What's interesting? What's interesting too about?
Oh God, yeah. It's like, how do you? I mean, Eric describes George as his best friend through the entirety of his life. It's like, you know, and George saved Eric from his heroin addiction. So it's like, dude, you slept with my wife, but I'm going to save you from your heroin. Okay.
Well, George ended up marrying Olivia, and I think that was probably a better match.
It worked out very well for George. Yeah.
And then we have Danny, and he's a spitting image of George, which is unbelievable.
So yeah,
I feel though like what I find interesting about this guy. I remember when Tom Petty put out Full Moon Fever, and the byline, like the opening line of the Rolling Stone review was, Tom Petty knows how to pick his friends, and it's the exact same thing. It's almost like George Harrison was paying it forward.
Yeah.
To Tom Petty, like this is how I kind of started my solo career. And while, let's be honest, Tom Petty was always Tom Petty. The Heartbreakers were just his backing band.
Yeah.
Realistically, to be able to exert that influence that other musicians exert to help George out. One.
Well, I mean, you think about it. This album is a who's who of '70s adult rock. You know, the band, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton. I mean, it's like, yeah, you're right. This is George paying it forward, and I mean, there's not much more you can say about that.
And three guitar heroes kind of all together on this too. George, Eric, Robbie Robertson.
Robbie,
Robbie Robertson is one of the more underrated guitar players of this era.
Yeah, for sure. I just watched The Last Waltz last weekend, and
really,
he gets a lot of flack for having the hero edit of that film because he became Scorsese's soundtrack producer later on in life. He rocks. Like he's so good, and he just doesn't care. It's amazing. He's so.
By the way, Todd, another original pressing I have is the band. I don't remember the actual name of the title of the album, but it's the Drove Old Dixie Down.
Yeah, the band.
The band, yeah. I have an original in my office right now. So
yeah, amazing, great album, and that album influenced what George did, along with music from Big Pink. So if you're interested, if you like this, I would highly recommend checking out the band's output.
Right. And just so you're aware too, if you're not collecting vinyl and down with the sickness like the rest of us are, it's great to just. One thing I've really enjoyed about our sojourn into albums is that if I don't own it, I can still go to Spotify, and I'm moving myself away from playlists. I'm actually listening to records as they are sequenced and as they were meant to be. This was the intention. You change the flow of an album by flipping tracks.
Yeah.
And it just, every song logistically follows the next logistical successor in on this album. It's a well mixed album. The fact that it's 3 albums, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, for some reason, that seemed to be the thing in the late '60s, early '70s.
Yeah, Blonde on Blonde really kind of exploded the double album thing at that point.
Yeah.
And then Four-Way Street from Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, I guess. Kind of like, you like it, here's everything, and have at it for $7.97 at your local record store.
Well, I mean, probably a lot of it too is like, this was around the time when artists were starting to get more demanding in their own productions.
Yeah.
Basically saying, hey, I want to include this, and this, Yeah. It wasn't just about, hey, okay, what's the song that's going to get the most radio airplay,
Yeah. And really it goes back to Sgt. Pepper for the Beatles saying, we're going to make this album, but we're not going to tour. This is our tour.
Yeah.
Do this, experience this like you would experience our concert, but it's going to be better because you can actually hear it and we can actually, get some creative fulfillment out of it. So, and Sgt. Pepper is what it is. It's a wonderful album. There's really no single on that album. No, if you look at Beatles 1, there's really no big hit on that album.
Right.
There's wonderful songs that I will listen to till the day I die, but there's no radio single on that album.
Right.
And kudos to them for doing that. And all 4 of them did that in their career. I think, Ringo had probably one of the earliest hits, right? Andy, what you said, he had one of the earliest hits. No, George had the.
No, George was the first one to hit number 1.
Right, but Ringo had Photograph, and Ringo had It Ain't Easy, Don't Come Easy, and Paul had Maybe I'm Amazed, and But the rest of those albums, they did what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
Which I commend them for. Because they were the Beatles. They could do whatever they wanted.
Nice. Yeah. So I
sorry, Andy, to go back to your point about Spotify and playlists, I wholeheartedly agree. Obviously, I have albums to spare. I like listening to albums in the intended order. What I do like doing sometimes is taking the White Album, which is right here, and whittling it down to one album, 14 tracks, and you take the Beatle formula of 5 John, 5 Paul, 3 George, 1 Ringo. And you make an album out of those songs and outtakes and B-sides and all that kind of stuff. I'm a big nerd. Let's just put it on the table. Well, it's fun to do that too.
I think that, actually, it's funny you bring that up because a friend of mine that I used to work with, Pete Callahan, he is a big Beatles fan. And he and I would have this conversation about our thoughts on the White Album. And we both kind of had the same idea. Like, you drill this down to one album, you've got the best Beatles album ever made.
Mm-hmm.
There's just I joke about this, and I will continue to joke about this in the next few episodes about Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. There's enough there for one truly great album.
Yeah.
But with the White Album, there's just so much. It might just be too much acid. It might just be, John and Paul kind of exerting their vice-like grip on the creative control.
Yeah.
That the Beatles had. That it's like I listen to these songs that are on All Things Must Pass, and I'm like, I guarantee one of these songs was vetoed for Wild Honey Pie, and it's just
right, absolutely
right.
I have no proof to go on, but you can't prove it wrong.
But you get the feeling that was the case.
Yeah.
How can you deny "Beware of Darkness"?
Right.
Oh God, yeah.
Any of these songs, I don't know. It's maddening to me, but we have this, and this will live forever. So
this is an amazing album. I love that album. At some point, I will probably pick it up used.
Just beware.
What's that?
Beware when you do. It's a box set, and it's got a book kind of spine on it. And if you pick it up used, it's probably going to be beat to hell. So
okay, well,
just this was maybe 29 bucks. So
that's not bad.
Yeah, just search around for it.
Yeah, I'm sure I could find that. So, any other thoughts on All Things Must Pass before we throw it to next week's episode?
No, it's just like I say, it's for me, it's one of my desert island albums. It will always be a part of my collection, whether it's on vinyl, on streaming or whatever. I must have All Things Must Pass as part of my collection.
I would agree with you. It's been with me through good times and bad times, and it's made me feel different things in those times. And that's the mark of a truly great album.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. I adore this album. And so it's really nice that this will be our first episode discussing such a fantastic album.
Yeah, it was definitely a good choice.
Yeah. So next week, though, we're gonna do things a little differently. So, we're on an upcoming conversation of our podcast, Geek Salad. It's the annual 30-year retrospecticus of that year's music. So we are going to be discussing the music of 1991 on our next recording of our podcast. So part 2 of our Warner Brothers animation coming up. So you'll still get that. But we're going to be discussing the music of 1991. So what I'm thinking about doing, I told Todd about this and he loved this idea. So Joe, we're going to take it to Twitter and we're going to have a tournament of some of the greatest rock albums of 1991.
Okay.
And the overall winner over the course of the week will be the one that we discuss. However, I'm leaving 2 of those out because those are going to be a head-to-head competition.
Oh.
And I'm not going to spoil it with what they are, but it's going to be awesome.
It'll be the rock album of 1991 Royal Rumble. Here we go. Let's do this.
So I really hope you enjoyed this first episode, especially if you're a music fan. I'm hoping that we'll get some guests to appear on here. We've got lots of our pod pals who are music fans. We'd love to get them on there. And if you have a suggestion for a record that you would like us to review in the future, let us know. What are your thoughts also on All Things Must Pass? Is this one of your go-tos? Are you more of a John fan or a Paul fan, or are you a George fan? Because I think all three of us are agreed that we are George fans. George is our Beatle.
Yep.
Agreed.
So let us know. Leave a polite comment below. If you love this, or you even just passively like it, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to Geek Salad if you haven't already. Speaking of which, Joe, Todd, and I host a little podcast called Geek Salad. You can find that wherever your podcasts can be found. You can follow us on Twitter at Geek Salad Radio, where we are most active. However, we do have a Facebook presence at Geek Salad Podcast. Also, check out our merchandise at our T Public store. I wore this all day for that. Yeah, I know. Hot. So yeah, check out our merchandise at the T Public store, keyword Geek Salad Podcast, where you can get t-shirts, mugs, PPE, you name it. There's probably something you can get for it. So, am I forgetting anything, guys?
No, I think you got it all covered.
I think you're good.
Fantastic. This is the first time I'm producing one of these. So anyway, so until next time, I'm Andy.
I'm Joe.
I'm Todd.
Go forth, be nerdful, and rock on.